Every aspect of our lives has been reshaped by technology, from the way we get around, the way we seek information, and the way we communicate. It's easy to think that if only our technology advances enough, we'll finally be satisfied. The fact is, we remain shackled by our primitive Darwinian brains. Humanity, for whatever progress we have made, is the result of an unguided, natural, 3.8 billion year long experiment of chemistry. Evolution is the process that has made you what you are, but it is not far-seeing. It does not and cannot consider the future, make decisions about where we ought to go, how we ought to be. Passing on genes is the only objective. But as thinking human beings, we care about far more than that. Consciousness means that we have the capacity to experience the world, to reflect upon, and, most importantly, to shape it. And so, what begins as humanism, our most sympathetic understanding and treatment of human nature, becomes transhumanism, the drive to fundamentally revolutionize what it means to be human by way of technological advancements. Changing human nature might be the most dangerous idea in all of human history, or perhaps the most liberating. Generally speaking, transhumanist thought does two things. First, it considers current trends to see how future technologies will develop and how they might affect us. Second, it calls for the use of current and upcoming technology to bring about beneficial societal change.
Just a rumor, and now the world's first post-human is a reality.
God, no wonder he wants to live forever. Look at her.
Welcome, Mia. Welcome to the show. Thank you. Thank you. How are you today? Hi.
How does it make you feel to be the only one of your kind?
Special?
Oh, well, you're very obviously special. The question is,
how long is Mia going to be special? How long will Mia be the
only Transbeman? Sources inside Qualia say that Mortlake has planned a wide-scale birthing, as he calls it, of many more Transbemans, possibly hundreds, maybe even thousands.
So here's a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a magician who could cast any spell he put his mind to. His mind was so powerful that he thought of a way for his mind to last forever. Because he knew his flesh would rot, he put every thought, every action, every word, and put it into a magical box. This box that would never rust, never rot, and never end. And so the magician made this box so small on the outside, but so big on the inside that it could store even his mind, that it almost didn't have edges, that it almost went on and on. And so he filled the magic box with sights and smells and sounds. And of course, he filled the box with his thoughts. So many, many thoughts. And the magician's magic box meant that the magician would never die.
Skin of Qualia flesh tech. Enhanced intellect. Greater resistance to pain. Increased metabolic efficiency. Made from the human cloth, minus the genetic markers for cruelty, greed, and hatred. That's why we are the past. And she is the future.
I'm Martin Rothblatt. I'm a person who likes to take dreams and turn them into realities. I started in the 1980s by launching PanAmSat, the first international television satellite. In the 1990s, I launched Sirius Satellite Radio to bring Howard Stern and other uncensored music direct to people's cars throughout the country. Around the year 2000, I began United Therapeutics, a biotechnology company based on finding medicines that were personalized to people's unique illnesses. And today I'm executive producer of the Singularity is Near film as part of my effort to promote global awareness and appreciation of the necessity and practicality of greatly prolonging human life.
If you could share your thoughts on what would be feasible as we go forward 5, 10, 20 years in biotechnology.
We're extending everyone's lifespans with regenerative medicine, with personalized medicine. Now that we have the DNA decoded, we are able to reprogram the DNA molecule that governs every aspect of our body, our health and our illness, to give us only health. And people have an unlimited amount of desire and willpower to extend their life. This desire and willpower will be channeled into economic forces to propel biotechnology until we achieve, well before the end of this century, the death of death.
Now, some people say we can overcome certain diseases, but this just sort of a basic maximum lifespan. So what's your view of our ability to engineer around whatever those limits might be?
Ray, I think we all have to be very skeptical about people who say that there are limits to what people can do. Human beings are the species that transcend their limits, and it was just a few decades ago that people said that humans would never break the sound barrier, that humans would not break into outer space, and it's the same thing with technological immortality. It's just a concept that thousands of teams of people throughout the world are working on, and I'm quite confident that we'll be able to transcend the barrier of disease and old age before the end of this century.
So I had never heard of the Transbemans movement prior to a couple of weeks ago, but I came across it after learning about this individual named Martin Rothblatt. I heard Andrew on Revelations Radio News mention this person in passing a few weeks ago. So I've been tumbling down this rabbit hole ever since. And indeed, it turned out to be a very fascinating individual and topic, to the point where I've been reading through this book, which I'll get to in a moment. But Terasem is a religious movement / organization created by Rothblatt, who is a transhumanist and transgender person who believes themselves to be a woman, and has a very interesting background life story, starting out in the 70s, studying law at UCLA, satellite law, and then working somehow with the government and NASA, and eventually founding Sirius XM Radio, which everybody's heard of. And so was the founder and CEO of XM Radio, and then some other satellite communications company. And then somewhere around late 90s, early 2000s, Rothblatt's daughter got sick with PAH, pulmonary arterial hypertension, and so sold all his shares and gave up everything in the satellite business to study this disease, and then it wound up founding this company called United Therapeutics, which somehow got a hold of this drug that had been already developed but never marketed to anything. And so now as the head of this company is the highest paid, credits himself as being the highest paid woman CEO. And so those clips at the beginning were from some of these Terasem videos that were put out a decade or more ago. And it's still going strong. And overall, if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, a quick perusal of this person's bio, and then specifically the material that we're going to get into from the lectures and the book that I've actually been reading through, I think you'll see pretty quickly why it would be of interest to me here and to the topics that I've been exploring. So yeah, started out as a space enthusiast, and in college was actually part of this L5 Society, which was founded in 1975 by Carolyn Meinel and Keith Hansen to promote the space colony ideas of Gerard K. O'Neill. And O'Neill was also influential on billionaires such as Jeff Bezos. Played clips before of Bezos talking about how eventually we're going to have to move off-world and the Earth will be like a big park, and we'll live in space stations or on Mars colonies and things like that. And so Rothblatt is really deep into all that as well, as we'll get into. But I wanted to play those clips showing that sort of dramatic portrayal of the Transbemans, the transitional bioelectrical humans, and this whole concept that Rothblatt has been preaching for many years, that transhumanism and transgenderism are essentially inseparable from one another. And I suppose technically the argument is that transgenderism is really just a subset of transhumanism, and actually argues pretty at length to that end. And so while this whole issue is just exploding in our culture kind of by the day almost.
We are in a new dawn of gender and sex complexity.
Let's take a look. My name is Dylan Mulvaney. I am a trans woman, and I am documenting my transition publicly on TikTok for the world to see. When people started watching and the numbers kept getting higher, I realized quickly how public my transition would be. Of course, I knew that there would be backlash and negativity. I try to not let the internet's words hurt me or my spirit. But do you know what does hurt? Seeing people in power and authority figures creating laws and bills that are actively trying to harm us transhumans, especially trans children.
Actively trying to harm us transhumans. Harm us transhumans.
So I've been reading through this book by Rothblatt titled From Transgender to Transhuman, a Manifesto on the Freedom of Form. And this was released in 2011, and it was essentially a re-release of a previous book. It was an updated version of the original book that was published in 1996 by Rothblatt, at which time it was titled The Apartheid of Sex. So this transgender to transhuman book, it expounds on all the apartheid of sex concept, and then adds whatever new transhumanist ideas to the mix. And so I wanted to read through a few of these excerpts from it, because while on the one hand this is kind of a weird, this is just a weird territory, this has been a weird topic to explore and a weird book to read. And so I wanted to read a few excerpts from it just to give you kind of an overview. And to bear in mind, think about if you heard this in 2011 and try to imagine how society and the culture would have responded to it, even just over 10 years ago. versus today and the things that are now being debated and espoused by more and more people, particularly in the younger generations, of course. So here we go. The bimodal segregation of people into men and women has oppressed women from the time of the ancients. As Margaret Mead observed in her 1949 treatise Male and Female, the effect of creating artificial expectations for each sex is to, quote, limit the humanity of the other sex. As we gradually free ourselves from stamping newborn babies as one sex or the other, gender expectations will become self-defining and the full cultural liberation of all people can occur at last. We live under an apartheid of sex. At birth we are cast into a sex type based on our genitals. From then on we are brainwashed into a sex type appropriate culture called gender. Women can mimic, but not too much, the powerful entrenched men. But men who try to be, quote, womanish face the kind of vicious scorn reserved for traitors or the humiliation accorded masters who identified with slaves. Like the apartheid of race, blurring of class boundaries is the gravest offense because it challenges the division of reality. Hence the old feminist doctrine of separate but equal was more acceptable to the male power structure because they knew that it would never occur. But the new feminist doctrine of sexual continuity is threatening. It destroys the male-dominated power structure completely. If there are no hard and fast sex types, then there can be no apartheid of sex. If there is no apartheid of sex, then there is no entrenched birthright of power. People must achieve on their own. To men threatened by economics and social survival, loss of birthright superiority is frightening. Yeah. So that's essentially the whole narrative of the apartheid of sex, is that all throughout, he goes into like how in the ancient Greeks and stuff is where supposedly it started, where males, started subjugating females. So it's this legacy of patriarchal oppression that goes back thousands of years that they're finally wanting to overthrow. So essentially the way you vindicate women is by destroying the very idea of women, gender continuity. As we break free of the chains of sexual apartheid, we will establish a new human culture of unparalleled creativity and personal development. From Homo sapiens, literally the wise man, shall emerge our new species, persona creatus, the creative person. From the subjugation of women shall emerge the sensitization of men, and from the apartheid of sex shall evolve the freedom of gender. Person creatus, a new species, implies a very fundamental break with the DNA-based definition of Homo sapiens. Okay, so this is important. Yet as indicated above, we have already made that fundamental break as a consequence of technological changes in the way we live and reproduce. Our DNA no longer dictates all aspects of our individual survival, for if it did, nearsighted individuals would be gone, eaten by predators they could not see. Our DNA no longer dictates our ability to pass on our genes. In vitro fertilization with or without embryo transfer routinely provides reproduction for hundreds of thousands of infertile couples. The greatest catapult for humanity into a new species lies just beyond the event horizon of transgenderism. Based upon our rapidly accelerating ability to imbue software with human personality, autonomy, and self-awareness, a movement of transhumanists has joined transgenderists in calling for the launch of persona creatus. The basic transhumanist concept is that a human need not have a flesh body, just as a woman need not have a real vagina. Again, 2011, you'd be like, say what? Humanness is in the mind, just as is sexual identity. As software becomes increasingly capable of thinking, acting, and feeling like a human, it should be treated as a fellow human and welcomed as a fellow member of the technological species persona creatus. And that's another big aspect of this whole thing. The acknowledgement and legal protection of digital beings, whether they be artificially programmed AI softwares or uploaded humans, to the cloud or whatever. Uploaded mind files is what they call them. The biologist will insist that members of a common species be capable of producing fertile offspring, and so it is for transhumans and persona creatus. Reproduction will no longer necessarily occur, however, via joined DNA. Instead, people of flesh will upload into software the contents and processes of their minds. Think of this as taking all of your digital photos, movies, emails, online chats, Google searches, and blogging to the next level and merging it with mindware that can replicate how you think, feel, and react based on the huge digital database of your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. Once we have thus digitally cloned our minds, new digital people can be produced by combining some of our mindware with some of our partner's mindware. Voila, there are fertile offspring and the species persona creatus is alive. Furthermore, since purely digital people can reproduce with flesh humans in this manner, the humans and the transhumans are common members of persona creatus. Freedom of gender is, therefore, the gateway to a freedom of form and to an explosion of human potential. First comes the realization that we are not limited by our gross sexual anatomy. Then comes the awakening that we are not limited by our anatomy at all. The mind is the substance of humanity. Mind is deeper than matter. So, you get the idea that the whole thing about the spectrum of gender is that gender is separate from biology. Separating the person, the way that they think, the way that they express, the way that they identify, being separate from, the male, female, binary categories. And so this whole book is essentially a very in-depth treatise on this whole claim. While the ancient trunk of sexual identity lies rooted in successful reproductive strategies, the fruit of that tree has now spread far beyond DNA swapping. Breaking the connection between gender and genitals opened the channel between personhood and form. Once we realize that our essential sweetness is in our minds, and that each of us has unique life path potential not fully tethered to a body-determined route, then it is as sensible to be transhuman as it is to be transgendered. The being is mightier than the gene. Transhumans will want to be documented. There are too many disadvantages to being undocumented. Society will be worried about providing birth certificates and hence citizenship to people without a body. Everyone will look to the historical precedents of recognizing people as persons rather than colored persons, and people as people rather than as gendered people. So again, essentially, the apartheid of sex is exactly what it sounds like. So to state that men are men and women are women, and that is the way that we have been created. According to this narrative, that is exactly the same thing as apartheid in South Africa, where it is a two-class system. So to call women women is to essentially dehumanize them, degrade them. The category as itself is exactly like racism. So yeah, I don't really need to explain that whole propaganda tactic because we've seen it a million times now. But yes, taking that to the next level though, and so this is kind of where I wanted to explore and be really interested in whatever input you guys have on like how this is kind of the whole transitional bioelectrical human. Like all this stuff. So again, this person's been around for a long time, and I'm not even exactly sure when Martin supposedly became Martine, but it was I think back in the 80s or 90s. And even though definitely not a household name at this point, but in some ways it's kind of like the transgender version of an Elon Musk with all these crazy companies that just get financed and yeah. Ray Kurzweil was apparently on the board of United Therapeutics. Okay. And so, yeah, United Therapeutics they have a couple of drugs that are kind of their main revenue stream. But then there's a whole division that is into these xenotransplants, which are like synthetic lungs and hearts and genetically modified pig organs that they're trying to transplant into people. So,
regenerative medicine is another avenue that we're pursuing. And the idea is we build a lung from scratch.
We're basically creating a scaffold from a pig's lungs and then adding the patient's own stem cells back to that lung.
I mean, you can sit here and read through this book and read through this whole treatise and just tell yourself, well, this is just insane, and a person who wants to live forever and download their consciousness into a computer so that one day, there's a whole extensive presentation that Rothblatt gives on, he's really put a lot of thought into this. It's kind of impressive in a weird way. Like, if you put down $10,000 in 100 years, because we don't have, the technology just yet to resurrect you on the space station, obviously, so we got to build the big space station first and then work out all the bugs. But yeah, so you basically, Rothblatt argues that for $10,000 with interest, you put this money in an account, and then in 100 years after you've died, the interest will accrue so that it'll be worth like $10 million, and that should be ample amount of money for your space condo and your new synthetic body. And I'm not even joking.
Not a joke.
And so yeah, you can listen to this stuff and be like, you're insane, but then yeah, if this is just somebody writing science fiction novels or something, but no, this is a loud and proud transhumanist who is involved in, putting 3D printed organs into people and, all the rest. Everything that Ray Kurzweil has talked about, and Bezos and Musk, and all these transhumanists who are in the news all the time, and yet, especially with Musk, it's like, I hate to say it, but this whole Twitter business is not what most people want to believe it is. So it's not going the direction you want. Maybe for a little time, but I think that some people are already catching on. But what seems like a short-term, win for free speech and all that, I think is going to reveal itself to be a much deeper play. And a few videos ago, I played clips of him talking about, we need a one-size-fits-all thing like WeChat, like they have in China. And this is the guy who wants to put the chip in your brain. So indeed, from the digital passports to the idea of contact tracing and nanotech and all the rest. The thing looming on the horizon, the big elephant in the room at this point, is the CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which, now we have the Prime Minister of the UK pitching to the United Kingdom and, everyone else by extension. These things are coming. And thinking about this whole idea of the digital person being the real person, that's the message that really kind of keeps me up at night, I guess, in a way. I mean, not that all this, on the one hand, real damage is being done on all kinds of levels, to people's physical bodies, to their hearts and their minds, and spiritually, this is a destructive, anti-God ideology. But it is more than an ideology, and what I really appreciate about this whole book and individual and the Terrasem movement, and also I learned about this transhumanist church down in Florida called the Church of Perpetual Life, where Rothblatt was a guest speaker a few years ago and gives this presentation on Terrasem, and really just coming out and at least owning the fact that this is actually a religion. That transhumanism is a religion, and transgenderism is a subset of transhumanism, as we established. So it really all is a part of, really what you could call it evolution, you could call it scientism, you could call it eugenics, you could call it all kinds of things. But it's really all the same ideology, the same belief system, and so here, let's play a little bit from the Church of Perpetual Life.
I welcome you to the Church of Perpetual Life, and would like to also welcome everyone who's joining us online. Many people are joining us there through our live streaming today. Welcome to the event as well. We'd like to ask you to check out our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook, where you can find out more information about our church. And here at the Church of Perpetual Life, we follow the ideas and ideals of Nikolai Fedorovich Fedorov's beliefs that stem from the possibility of diverting human energies away from war and dissension towards measures of protecting mankind against natural disasters like floods and droughts and earthquakes, and to transform nature from a temporary enemy into an eternal friend. And since death is a natural phenomenon, it too could and should be overcome by knowledge and action. After the main sermon today, we are very happy to have an impressive presentation that will show how close we are, or we may be, to reversing the aging process and discovering ways to achieve indefinitely extended lifespans. That will come after our primary sermon. Our speaker today is a lawyer, author, and entrepreneur. Ms. Rothblatt graduated from UCLA with a combined law and MBA degree, and began work in Washington, D.C., first in the field of communication satellite law, and eventually in life sciences projects like the Human Genome Project. She is currently the founder and CEO of United Therapeutics Corporations, and holds the distinction of being the highest paid female executive of the United States.
Perpetual life, that's what we believe in. That's our belief, and I don't think you could say it any more simply and directly than the Church of Perpetual Life. I can say that, we are honored and that we are proud to attest, worship, follow, all of those kind of be devoted to the Church of Perpetual Life. So thank you so much for creating this. Well, let me start by talking about what is Terrasem. So Terrasem is a religious organization It believes in bringing technology, modern technology, and advancing technology into all the different religions and spiritualities. In fact, it transcends all religions, and we think of Terasem as like the forest, and all the religions are the trees inside the forest. And we basically are devoted to three things: diversity, unity, and joyful immortality. So that's what Terasem is all about. Now in Terasem, we have 4 basic tenets. And we have these on giant billboards in each of our Terasem. We call them ashrams. And in each of our Terasem ashrams, we have these giant boards. There are 4 basic tenets. Life is purposeful. Death is optional. God is technological. And love is essential. Now, when some people see these, they say, life is purposeful. Okay, I kind of get that. Death is optional. You know what? Of course, to this group, there's not going to be any what there. You know, obviously, death is optional. But to the lay public that's not so familiar with transhumanism and immortalism, that's a bit of a surprising concept. However, as I'll show in a moment, that Teilhard was already there and actually laid out how this is very consistent with all mainstream religions and Christianity. Now, where people really get most shocked about Terasem is our statement that God is technological. But this is where I was most excited in reading the works of Teilhard. As I'll show you in a moment, Teilhard saw that God is not like, a man sitting up above with a beard. He saw that God is forward motion. God is forward, not above. God is ahead, not above. God is a relational process of evolution, technical evolution, biological evolution. So it's very, very consistent. And last but not least, that love is essential. Teilhard called love the glue that holds everything together. Terasem feels the same way.
So yeah, this whole thing was kind of a trip too, as for years we've been talking about scientism and it being basically the reintroduction of the ancient mystery schools in a modernized veneer, right? But that it is a religion, and here we have these people getting together and just owning that fact and owning their whole mission to defeat death using technology. Technology is God, and to just come out and say it. So it's like, in a weird way, it was like, okay, as much as I disagree with this person on pretty much everything they're saying about everything, on a weird level, I like, at least there's a recognition of the reality that like death is something that is a problem. Like, death is like the real enemy. Death is the buck stops here. It's death. And so by saying death is optional, it's just very straightforward, like what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. God is not some being who's out there watching over us, who made us. God is forward motion. God is evolution. God is, this progression towards godhood. It's the whole transcendence idea. This is what transhumanism is. It is a religion. And so maybe part of making this video is just going like, wow, so here's a really serious transhumanist admitting that it's their religion. So it's like, okay, well, I do at least agree with you about that. And so just like I can disagree with lots of other religious belief systems and engage with them and discuss them, with still respecting their right to exist and their right to believe what they believe, that's essentially what is going on here today. And so, but then you have this familiar kind of like victim component of like, we've been oppressed women by calling women different than men, the separate but equal concept. No, that's oppression. That's misogyny. That's the patriarchy keeping you down. In reality, this is all, of course, projection of like the attitude towards the Father God, right? That's what the whole patriarchy kind of thing, it all flows back to like God the Father, and then, creating man in his image, and then woman out of man, and the whole biblical structure and order to family and society and all that. It really all goes back to that. But the only thing that's really kind of new to any of this, because like men dressing up like women is not a new phenomenon whatsoever either. And that goes back all throughout different societies and contexts and everything. But God has always been very clear about what his design for us was. But as we step into this new era where you have a combination of so many environmental factors playing havoc on people's bodies and development, whether even in the womb or as children or going through puberty. So there's way more confusion because of all these extra things going on in food and quote-unquote medicine and just, the environmental factors. But then combining with all this humanist ideology, essentially evolution that has been around, that is not new, but essentially it's like the culture and the society is it's like we're kind of catching up to this evolutionary paradigm that has been there like my whole life. And this is what is kind of fascinating to me. I'm thinking about this whole transgender debate and how, divisive it is. And in reality, like, okay, if you really believe that we all just came out of the primordial soup millions of years ago, and that we're all just these biological creatures crawling around on the surface of this orb in a vacuum, and some of those biological organisms turned into rats, and some eventually branched off and became everything else, including the bipedal humanoid things that eventually became human beings with, a concept of injustice and oppression and right and wrong and all this stuff, all these moral, ethical, spiritual components and questions and yearnings that evolution can't account for, that can't explain. And so while on the one hand you can kind of somewhat logically argue that, okay, male and female really are just a social construct, they're not really founded upon anything, since if there is no God, there's nothing to really say that male and female are, why should there be a binary? Why should reproduction be this way versus that way? Maybe there's 3 sexes, maybe there's no sexes, maybe it's an infinite spectrum of evolution. There's nothing to say that human beings should have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a nose and a mouth, or anything like that. It was just evolution playing its part, and so, maybe they'll concede that the male-women dichotomy had an evolutionary purpose for, a certain amount of history, a very small amount according to the evolutionary timeline, right? So it's all arbitrary. It's a biological spectrum. So from that standpoint, if you're really bought into evolution, I would say it's a somewhat coherent argument to just dismantle it, right? But then what they don't understand is that they're also dismantling every concept about, anything to do with morality or even meaning or purpose, or what even constitutes, what is your consciousness, if it's not simply just a mass of chemical and electrical processes going on, in your body. To the evolutionist, everything is just nanotech, right? Self-assembling nanotechnology. That's what evolution is, even at the beginning of this little transhumanist, promo clip. We're just a giant chemistry experiment, millions of years in the making. Okay, if that's true, then yeah, male and female, man, woman, it's all just chemistry. It's all just a fluid spectrum of different molecular combinations, right? It's just tinker toys. So yeah, but if that's really true, then it's really opening up this whole Pandora's box of being able to even explain why men supposedly oppressing women by thinking that women are just different from men and not necessarily lesser, but if you believe that like millions of years before that, like Tyrannosauruses were going around biting off Brontosaurus's heads, and that's just evolution and survival of the fittest and whatever, then somehow that didn't have a moral component to any of that. So why are humans any different than any of the other animals? That's kind of like what evolutionists really bend over backwards to explain away, or to avoid, I would say. So yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and in some ways it just makes it so much simpler. To me anyways, it makes it easier, because I really want people to hear me that I found it to be a very serious issue, and particularly about this idea of it being kind of a stepping stone. That transgenderism is a stepping stone to a greater transhumanist kind of revival or awakening, if you will. And so it's real, even though I would say that they're never going to achieve their goal of immortality, technological immortality. They're determined to try. It's an interesting kind of side-by-side comparison to kind of like this is really the only way to understand either of these topics, I would say. Like what transhumanism is. It really is about this disconnect between, the real core of transhumanist ideology is blurring that line between just the natural and the unnatural, the organic versus the synthetic. We become homo creatus, we become creators of life and our world around us. And so, yeah, it's all there. But the scary thing is that even though, there's a ton of people who are suddenly kind of on this bandwagon, and more, especially young people, experiencing what they call gender dysphoria, which is a concept that is taught, obviously, to them. But Rothblatt speaks about genodysphoria. And so what I'm saying is that even though I definitely do not believe that they'll ever be able to truly upload someone's consciousness into, the magic box, as it were, into a computer. The inverse kind of might be true, where you're connecting people digitally more and more, and that's all being downloaded into you, whatever that is. Okay, and there's different ways you can do it. We've been talking about BCI, brain-computer interface, for a long time, and all the different technologies that people have talked about to potentially bring that into being, whether it's Neuralace or James Giordano talking about Battlescape Brain. I came across this interesting video clip from 2019, just a few days ago, and this kind of ties into that, so check this out.
MIT engineers have developed a thread-like robot that can actively glide through narrow, winding pathways, such as the vasculature of the brain. This magnetically controlled device is a hydrogel-coated robotic thread, or guide wire, that could be used to deliver clot-reducing therapies and other treatments in response to certain brain blockages, such as stroke or aneurysms. To clear blood clots in the brain, doctors often perform a minimally invasive surgery in which a surgeon inserts a thin wire through a patient's main artery, typically in the leg or groin, then manually manipulate the wire up to the damaged brain vessel. These medical guide wires used in such procedures are passive and require surgeons specifically trained in the task. They are also made of a core of metallic alloys coated in polymer, a material that the researchers say could potentially generate friction and damage vessel linings if the wire were to get stuck in a particularly tight space. To help improve such endovascular procedures, the MIT engineers combined their work in hydrogels and magnetic actuation to produce a magnetically steerable, hydrogel-coated robotic thread, which they were able to make thin enough to guide through a life-size silicone replica of the brain's blood vessels. The core of the robotic thread is made from nickel titanium alloy, a material that is both bendy and springy. The team then coated the wire's core in a rubbery paste, or ink, which they embedded throughout with magnetic particles. Finally, they used a chemical process they previously developed to coat and bond the magnetic covering with hydrogel, a material that does not affect the responsiveness of the underlying magnetic particles, and yet provides the wire with a smooth, friction-free, biocompatible surface. They demonstrated the robotic thread's precision and activation by using a large magnet to steer the thread through an obstacle course of small rings, reminiscent of a thread working its way through the eye of a needle. The researchers also tested the thread in a life-size silicone replica of the brain's major blood vessels, including clots and aneurysms modeled after the CT scans of an actual patient's brain. The team filled the silicone vessels with a liquid simulating the viscosity of blood, then manually manipulated a large magnet around the model to steer the robot through the vessel's winding, narrow paths. The researchers say the robotic thread can be functionalized, meaning that features can be added, for example, to deliver clot-reducing drugs or to break up blockages with laser light. Their hope is to soon leverage existing technologies to test the robotic thread in vivo.
So yeah, that's just coated on a wire that you can see with the naked eye, for the sake of their experiments at the MIT there. So either you kind of get why that's significant or you don't. I don't know. But yeah, hydrogel and magnetic nanoparticles are a lot more ubiquitous and not top secret stuff than a lot of people think, and used in all kinds of applications and combinations and proposed ones in the future. Speaking of which, I came across this little news article just yesterday that ties into everything I'm talking about. Okay, this is from newsmedical.net, November 1st, 2022. Using an approach based on CRISPR proteins, MIT researchers, again, have developed a new way to precisely control the amount of a particular protein that is produced in mammalian cells. This technique could be used to finely tune the production of useful proteins such as the monoclonal antibodies used to treat cancer and other diseases, or other aspects of cellular behavior. In their new study, which appears in Nature Communications, the researchers showed that this system can work in a variety of mammalian cells with very consistent results. Skipping down here, okay. Many therapeutic proteins, including monoclonal antibodies, are produced in large bioreactors containing mammalian cells that are engineered to generate the desired protein. Several years ago, researchers in MIT's Synthetic Biology Center, including Lou's lab, began working with Pfizer Inc. on a project to develop synthetic biology tools that could be used to boost the production of these useful proteins. To do so, the researchers targeted the promoters of the genes they wanted to upregulate. In all mammalian cells, genes have a promoter region that binds to transcription factors, proteins that initiate the transcription of the gene into messenger RNA. So in previous work, scientists had designed synthetic transcription factors, including proteins called zinc fingers, to help activate target genes. However, zinc fingers and most other types of synthetic transcription factors have to be redesigned for each gene that they target, making them challenging and time-consuming to develop. So in 2013, researchers in Lou's lab developed a CRISPR-based transcription factor that allowed them to more easily control transcription of naturally occurring genes in mammalian and yeast cells. In this new study, the researchers set out to build on that work to create a library of synthetic biological parts that would allow them to deliver a transgene, a gene not normally expressed by the cell, and precisely control its expression. The idea is to have a full-spectrum synthetic promoter system that can go from very low to very high to accommodate different cellular applications, Chen says. So yeah, a transgene. Is this trans ideology? Is this transhumanism? Or is this just, is this just medicine? Are we blurring the lines between the organic and the synthetic just a little bit today? Are we already blurring all the lines and all the divisions between the things that God has made and the things that God has given us to live and be healthy and physically function the way we were designed to? I mean, this stuff is just coming out all over the place. And at the bottom, the research was funded by Pfizer, MIT, RCA Synthetic Biology Program, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, the University of South Dakota Sanford School of Medicine, and NIH Ruth Kirstein NRSA Postdoctoral Fellowship, and the U.S. Department of Defense.
I just want you to know. I love you, Mommy and Daddy.
I know you do, sweetheart. And I'm going to ask you to take the filter off. Will you do that for me?
I think I've been uncomfortable for a very long time.
We know.
I've been thinking ever since I was born that I don't belong in this body. Oh my God.
It's all right. It's really okay, darling.
I've been reading up on it. And I think I'm trans.
Oh, sweetheart. Oh, it's all right, darling. I swear.
It really is. Now look at us, we're fine. We're completely fine, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I know we might be a bit slow and a bit old, and this is going to be confusing for us, and we'll make a mess of it sometimes, but we love you. Hmm?
We love you. We absolutely love you. We always will. I mean, we don't need to rush. We've got lots of time to talk about this.
And if it turns out that we've got a lovely son instead of a lovely daughter, then we'll be happy.
No, I'm not transsexual.
Oh.
Is that not the word now?
But you said trans.
What did we call you then?
I'm not transsexual. I'm transhuman.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, they keep changing the words. I don't know the difference.
I don't want to change sex.
No, sure. We say gender now, don't we? I'm sorry.
I said I'm not comfortable with my body, so I want to get rid of it. this thing, all the arms and legs and every single bit of it, I don't want to be flesh. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to escape this thing and become digital.
What do you mean?
They say one day, soon, they'll have clinics in Switzerland where you can go and you'll sign a form and they'll take your brain and download it into the cloud.
And your body?
Recycled. Into the earth.
So you want to kill yourself?
I want to live forever. As information, because that's what transhumans are, Mum. Not male or female, better. Where I'm going, there's no life or death, there's only data. I will be data.